The girl was not born in winter, but it seemed winter never left her. They called her Lark, though she hadn't sung since her mother was buried beneath the frostbitten soil of Cimarron Ridge. She was 10 when the fever took her mother, 12 when the debts swelled thick and black like storm clouds, and just shy of 13 the night her father pulled her out by the wrist into the torchlight of the trading square. He was drunk, as he often was since the mine shut down and the copper dried up, but this night he was mean with it. Fresh blood strong back, nose to keep quiet, he slurred, shoving her forward like livestock. She wore her mother's shawl. It still smelled of sage and soap, though the cloth had gone threadbare as breath. The auction wasn't official. Nothing in Longbrush ever was. It was a crowd of men with tobacco breath and hands that fidgeted with belts or flask lids. A rusted bell rang. Lark kept her eyes on the dirt. One man offered a pig, another half a bottle of decent rye. Her father laughed like a dying dog. Then a man stepped forward, quiet as a shadow. He didn't yell or bargain. He simply named a price no one else dared match. $30, real coin, enough to keep her father pickled for weeks. The girl didn't lift her head. She knew better. The man who bought her wasn't old, but he was worn. He had a limp that dragged one leg just a second behind the other, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He didn't touch her when he led her away. Didn't speak either, until they were out beyond the chapel ruins, and the wind took the voices of the crowd. "You're not property," he said. Lark stared at him. She didn't know what to say to a lie like that. The man's name was Elijah Vane, widower, failed farmer. He'd buried his wife and infant son last winter after the fever swept through Hollow Creek. Same fever, same cold ground. He'd meant to sell the farm after, but no one wanted it. The soil was sour, the well dry as bone. Still, something made him stay. That night he gave her the old guest room and a chipped plate of beans. He didn't ask questions, didn't pray either. Just sat by the fire with a ledger in his lap, flipping pages he never wrote on. The wind howled outside. Inside, Lark didn't sleep. She learned early, safety was not a promise. It was a loan, paid back with silence, obedience, and knowing where the exits were. But Elijah never came to her door, never raised his voice. He didn't even lock the barn. A week passed, then two. She waited for the catch. The farm was half starved and half wild. A few chickens still scratched at the yard. The mule, Old Cinder, was blind in one eye and hated ropes. The house creaked like a body in pain, but she cleaned it, patched the broken window with flour paste and newspaper, learned how to start the stove without choking the chimney. She never asked what he wanted from her. She only watched. Elijah drank tea, not whiskey. He prayed once a week at dawn, alone by a crooked oak behind the barn. He spoke to the mule like it was family, and he never asked why she flinched when he reached for a spoon. By the third month, she stopped hiding bread under the floorboard. One morning he came in from the fields bleeding from the hand, barbed wire. Lark fetched the salve and a rag. When he offered his hand, she almost didn't take it, but she did, wrapped it tight. Her fingers shook, his didn't. "You're not what he said," she murmured. Elijah looked at her, just looked. "He was drunk," she added, as if that explained anything. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know," she said. But she didn't believe it. Not yet. Spring came late to Hollow Creek, slow and sullen. Snow clung to the hills like a grudge, and the creek didn't thaw until May, but the soil began to soften. When Lark sank her hands into the garden bed, it didn't bite her fingers like before. Elijah didn't ask her to plant anything. He didn't give her orders. Still, she found the seed sacks in the cellar and sorted them by color and weight. She taught herself the names by matching the drawings on the labels. Beans, carrots, onion bulbs, corn she saved for last. The garden gave her something to do with her silence. In Longbrush, silence was fear. On the farm, it was a kind of peace. She found herself humming under her breath one morning and nearly stopped cold from the sound of it. She never sang, not since. Elijah worked the far pasture during the day, hammering new fence posts in a slow rhythm. The limp made his walk lopsided, but he never complained. When the mule escaped, he didn't curse, just followed the tracks and coaxed her back with an apple. Some evenings, Lark watched him mend tack by lantern light. He worked with the kind of focus that made noise feel like disrespect. She wanted to ask about his wife, about the baby, but the words stuck in her throat like splinters. Instead, she asked, "Why did you take me?" Elijah didn't look up. "Because no one else would," he said. It should have stung, but it didn't. It felt like truth. A hard truth, but clean. "You could have left me there," she said. He tied off the leather strip he was working and leaned back. The fire flickered against his jaw, showing the deep lines carved there. "I could have," he said, "didn't want to." There was a kind of stillness that followed, different than the kind that comes from fear or fatigue. A stillness that let breath move without worry. That night she left the door to her room open a crack, just a crack, enough to hear the wind and know someone else was near. By midsummer, Lark could tell time by the sky. She learned to gut fish, pluck hens, and balance her weight on the hayloft beam without creaking a single board. She didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed when she walked. Then the letter came. Folded and water-stained, it arrived by way of a trader passing through from the east. Elijah read it at the kitchen table, the color draining from his face slow as dusk. "Problem?" she asked. He didn't answer. That night he packed a rifle, a roll of cash, and left before dawn without a word. Lark found the back door open, the hinge rocking slightly in the wind. He was gone for 4 days. She fed the mule, chopped wood, carried water from the stream, kept the routine like a prayer. On the 5th night he came back with a black eye and a cut lip, said nothing, walked straight to the porch and sat. Lark brought him a damp cloth and stood over him. He took it, pressed it to his face, winced once. "Was it about the letter?" she asked. He nodded. "Did you kill him?" He looked up sharply. She never asked anything like that before. "No," he said, "but I wanted to." Lark stared at the blood on his collar. It was dry now, crusted like old rust. "Good," she said. He laughed then, quiet, broken, short-lived. It was the first time she heard the sound. Later that summer, a man came riding down the lane. Suit coat, polished boots, he didn't fit. Elijah wasn't home. The man asked Lark her name, asked if she was the girl taken from Longbrush. "I wasn't taken," she said. The man smiled like a snake. "You'll need to come with me," he said. She stepped back into the doorway. "I don't think I will." He reached for her arm. She didn't scream, she bit. He cursed and slapped her hard enough to send her into the woodpile. Elijah found her there when he returned, blood on her lip, fingerprints bruising her wrist. She didn't say anything, didn't have to. The man was gone, his bootprints still in the mud. Elijah stared at them for a long time, jaw clenched. That night he oiled the rifle and locked the door. "Why would he come here?" she asked. Elijah didn't answer for a long time. "Because people think you don't have a choice," he said. Then he looked at her, the firelight soft in his eyes. "But you do." When the harvest came, it wasn't much, but they didn't starve. Lark had grown lean, but her cheeks no longer looked hollow. She still didn't talk much, but when she did, her voice held weight. They built a new fence together that fall, measured the wood, dug the posts, took turns hammering. Elijah let her use the rifle, taught her how to sight it, how to keep her breath steady. The first time she fired, the kick nearly knocked her back. She grinned, though, just a flicker. "You're a quick learner," he said. She didn't say anything, but that night she left a folded wildflower by his plate at supper. A thank you in her own language. He didn't mention it, just tucked it into his ledger. Winter came again, as it always did, but this one was different. There was warmth in the house now, a steady warmth that didn't come from the fire. And Lark, for the first time in her memory, slept without waiting for footsteps outside her door. The third winter was brutal. Ice split the barn roof in two places, and coyotes took the last of the hens. The creek froze solid, then cracked loud enough to wake them both in the night. Still, the fire held, and the mule lived, and there was flour enough for bread. Lark was 15 now, and had grown into her silence like bark on a tree. She moved with a purpose, watched the sky for signs of thaw, and had learned to sharpen the axe better than Elijah. The rifle stayed behind the stove. She cleaned it once a week. Elijah's limp had worsened. The cold drove the pain deep into his hip, but he said nothing, only grit his teeth and shifted slower. Lark noticed. She noticed everything. One morning she found him collapsed halfway between the shed and the woodshed. His breath was ragged, sweat freezing on his brow. She dragged him inside without a word, hauled water from the creek, boiled it for compresses. When he woke, he didn't ask what happened, just looked at her and nodded. "You can't work like that," she said. "I have to." "No," she said fiercely, "you don't." And he listened. She started managing the trade trips, just 2 towns over, riding old Cinder with a sack of dried beans or jerky to barter for medicine and salt. The first trip, she kept her hand on the rifle the whole time. The second, she dared to dismount. Men stared, but she stared back. The girl they remembered from the auction square was gone. In her place was someone lame, with dirt beneath her nails, a faint scar on her jaw, and eyes like river stone. By the fourth trip, they stopped calling her little girl. Spring brought a letter. Different handwriting, neater, the kind that didn't belong in Hollow Creek. Elijah opened it with his knife. "What is it?" she asked. "A summons." "To where?" "Court," he said, "in Dawes." He passed it to her. She read slowly, tracing each word with her thumb. It was about her, a custody challenge, filed by a man she didn't know, Jacob Langtry, a cousin of her father's. "He says he has blood rights," Elijah said. His voice was flat. "He's lying." Elijah nodded. But the law didn't care about lies, not when written in ink. They made the trip in silence, 2 days by mule cart. Dawes was bigger than Hollow Creek, more stone than wood, and smelled of coal and church bells. Lark kept her head down, but not low. She wasn't ashamed, just cautious. The courthouse was cold inside. White walls, tall windows, echoing voices. The judge was a thin woman with a sharp nose and an impatient gaze. Jacob Langtry wore a pressed vest and shoes with brass buckles. He smelled like perfume and ambition. He called her niece, said he'd been searching for her for years, that he'd wanted to rescue her from destitution, said she belonged with family. He lied well. Elijah didn't speak until asked. Then he said, "She isn't mine by blood, but I didn't sell her. I didn't hurt her. I fed her, gave her shelter, gave her choice. That should count for something." The judge turned to Lark. "And what do you want?" The courtroom went silent. It was the first time anyone had asked. Lark looked at Jacob Langtry, at the oil in his hair and the way his mouth curved like he'd already won. Then she looked at Elijah. His hands were raw from rope and frostbite. His coat was patched at the elbow, but he was solid, he was real. I want to go home, she said, with him. The judge looked at her a long time, tapped her pen twice against the desk, then said, so be it. That night they stayed in a cheap inn, shared a single loaf of rye and a bowl of stew. You didn't have to speak for me, she said. I wanted to, he answered. You think it's over. He shook his head. Men like that, they don't let go easy. She nodded, then we won't either. When they returned, the farm was as they'd left it. Smoke rose from the chimney. The garden waited, overrun with weeds but still alive beneath. She hung the court paper above the hearth, proof, not for others but for herself. That summer they rebuilt the barn roof together. She hammered, he measured. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew the fight wasn't over. She was his now, not by name, not by blood, but by something stronger. By choice. By her 16th year, Lark could kill a deer with one shot and skin it in under an hour. She could ride bareback, shoot at a gallop, and read the weather by the way the wind leaned against the trees. The girl who once flinched at footfalls had vanished. What remained was steel-laced with grace. That summer a fever swept through Dawes. Hollow Creek shut its doors tight. Elijah warned the neighbors, kept to the farm, and doubled the stock of dried roots and smoked meat, but they weren't immune to trouble. It came in the form of riders. 3 men, not cowhands, not traders. They rode like men who knew how to hurt and hadn't yet run out of reasons. Lark spotted them first, watching from the far tree line. She didn't call out, just went inside, pulled the rifle from behind the stove, and loaded 2 extra rounds into her pocket. Then she sat on the porch like she'd been waiting for them all along. They approached slow, the lead one smiling too wide. You vain? He asked. Elijah stepped beside her. Depends who's asking. The man didn't offer a name. Heard you been harboring a girl who ain't yours. Some folks got interest in seeing that corrected. Lark stood then, slow and deliberate. She's mine, Elijah said. She ain't nobody, Lark corrected. But I live here. I'll die here if it comes to it. The men laughed. But they didn't draw, not then. Something in her voice, or maybe the way her hand hovered near the trigger, made them second guess. They didn't come back that night. But the next day, the barn was torched. The blaze snapped them from sleep, orange light painting the windows. Lark ran barefoot through the dew, a bucket already in her hands before Elijah even shouted. The flames had taken the east wall and the rafters. They got the mule out, coughing from the smoke. When dawn came, the barn was ash and cinders. They buried old Cinder that afternoon. Her lungs hadn't held out. Lark didn't cry. Neither did Elijah. We rebuild, he said. She nodded. But the next day, Lark rode out alone. It was the first time she'd ridden for blood. Not trade, not errands. She wore no dress, just her trousers, a leather coat, and her mother's old shawl tucked tight around her neck. She carried the rifle, a hunting knife, and a small pouch of salt. She tracked them easy. They didn't hide their trail. Men like that thought the world owed them its silence. She found them camped near the stream at Miller's Hollow, drunk and lazy, around a half-dead fire. She watched until dusk. Then she crept in close, stepping between rocks like a ghost. The first man died with the knife in his neck. He didn't scream, just gurgled, choking on his own breath. The second reached for his gun too late. She shot him through the hand, then the stomach, left him moaning. The third bolted. She let him. Let him run all the way back to Dawes. Let him carry the story. When she came home, Elijah stood on the porch, arms crossed. He didn't ask. She didn't lie. They won't be back, she said. Are you sure? I left one breathing. He looked at her then, really looked, not like a father, not like a man beholden to the law, but like someone who'd seen the fire behind her eyes and knew exactly what it meant. You don't have to become what he made you, he said. I didn't, she answered. I became what I needed to. Autumn came early that year. The crops were lean, but enough. They built a smaller barn, stronger this time, stone at the base, thick oak beams. Lark carved a small pattern into one post, just a bird in flight, a lark, its wings wide. Elijah didn't mention it, but he ran his fingers across the carving every morning when he passed. Then in late October, a rider from Dawes arrived. Official this time, a deputy. He handed Elijah a folded paper. No words, just a look. Lark read it at the table. A trial, the surviving man had spoken. He named her. Named the knife. Named the ash of the barn. It didn't matter if he was a liar. The law needed to be seen doing something. You don't have to go, Elijah said. If I don't, they'll come again. You could disappear. She shook her head. I've done enough hiding. The night before she left, Elijah gave her his wedding ring. Keep it with you, he said. Even if it don't buy your freedom, it'll remind you who you are. She took it not with softness, with reverence. I'm not afraid of them anymore, she said. I know, he replied, but I am for you. She didn't answer, because she knew, and because she was going anyway. Dawes had grown harder since the last time. Dust covered everything, boots, banners, even the courthouse eaves. The fever had thinned the population, and the law now came in uniforms 2 sizes too big for the boys wearing them. The only thing that felt sharp was suspicion. Lark arrived at dawn, alone. She wore Elijah's coat, his ring strung on a rawhide loop around her neck, and the same boots she'd patched 4 winters running. Her rifle stayed sheathed, but her eyes carried weight. They gave her a cot in a cell beneath the main floor. Not locked, not yet, just precaution, they said, until the hearing. The man who'd lived, Clem Eder, sat outside the courthouse steps each morning like a vulture watching his prize spoil. His left hand was gone, wrapped in stained cloth, and his right twitched near the pistol at his side. You got one chance, girl, he hissed when she passed. She didn't pause, so do you. He stopped speaking after that. The trial wasn't meant to be long. Dawes didn't deal in drawn-out justice, but something in her quiet presence unsettled the room. She stood tall at the center, never flinching. They asked questions like knives. Why were you there? Did you provoke? Was it self-defense? She answered only what mattered. They burned our barn, she said. They came for me, not Elijah. They wanted to drag me back into something I had already survived. And you chose to kill, the prosecutor asked. I chose to live. The judge wasn't the same woman as before. This one was older, wearier, and clearly aware of the town's tensions. One side whispered about lawlessness. The other saw in Lark something they understood, a girl turned to iron because the world left her no other shape. In the back of the courtroom, Elijah sat with his hat in his lap, spine straight. He didn't speak, but his silence held more than most speeches. On the 3rd day, Clem Eder took the stand. He limped to the front, eyes glittering with venom. She came for blood, he spat, crept in like a devil, slit Robbie's throat in the dark, shot Tucker in the gut while he slept. Why were you camped near her farm? A coincidence. Why'd you run? She scared me. Lark almost laughed. Instead, she asked for the judge's permission to speak. Let her, the judge said. She walked to the center, looked Clem in the eye, not with rage, with cold memory. You slapped me to the ground 2 years ago, she said. Back when you thought I was property, and when you came back you brought fire. That wasn't fear, that was pride. He said nothing. You want the world to think I'm the monster, she said, her voice steady. But you burned a barn with a blind mule in it. The room was still. Even the judge didn't speak. The verdict came the next morning. Not guilty. On grounds of self-defense, proportional force, and character testimony. Elijah had written it himself, plain and sparse, a single page. She keeps her promises. She works harder than I ever did. She never once asked for pity, but she has more cause for it than any soul I've met. If she did what they say she did, then the question ain't why, but why no one stopped them before she had to. It was enough. Clem Eder stormed out, hand on his holster, but the sheriff had seen enough, and so had Dawes. They rode out at sunset. Elijah didn't speak until they'd cleared the town's edge. Still could have run, he said. Lark looked ahead. I'd rather walk into fire than be chased by it forever. He nodded, and they didn't speak again till home. That winter the barn was rebuilt stronger than the last. She carved the bird again, this time not flying but perched, watchful. Neighbors brought gifts, a calf, 2 sacks of grain, an old mare with a good temperament. No one mentioned the trial, but they came, that was enough. Lark started keeping records in the ledger Elijah once left blank. She marked harvests, medicine stores, names of visitors and storms. When Elijah's limp got worse, she learned how to grind herbs for poultices. When his hands trembled too much for woodwork, she picked up the hammer herself. They spoke less, but trusted more. Not as ward and guardian. Not as broken things, keeping each other warm. But as a household, a unit. A choice. One night, snow falling heavy outside, Elijah asked, "You ever want to leave this place?" Lark stared into the fire. "I want to own it first." He looked over. "You do." She shook her head. "Not just the land, the story. I want the next girl they try to sell to know my name, and know better." Elijah smiled, slow and tired. "You'll see it through." She nodded. "I will." The years stretched out, quiet and hard-earned. Lark turned 18 during the spring thaw. She didn't mark it with candles or cakes, just the planting of 3 plum trees near the barn. Each year after, she pruned them herself, whispered names to their branches, one for her mother, one for old Cinder, one for the girl she used to be. The farm thrived under her hands. She turned the clay-rich fields into rows of root vegetables, rotated the crops, built a second coop, repaired the grain shed. When traders came through, they asked her price, not Elijah. Some still called her the girl Vane raised. But most had learned to call her Lark Vane. Not as a courtesy, as fact. Elijah slowed, as men do. His hands grew stiff, his breath shorter in the cold. He took to reading more than working, sitting by the hearth with his spectacles tilted down and the dog-eared Bible open in his lap. He said little, but Lark watched his gaze grow soft when she moved through the room. Once she caught him weeping. Not loud, not for attention. Just tears quiet as snow melt, falling into the folds of a page. She didn't ask why. Some griefs don't need explaining. The last frost came early the year he passed. Lark had been gone 2 days, helping the Whitaker boys repair their west fence after a rock slide. When she returned, the house was still, the kettle empty, the stove cold. She found him in the rocker, eyes closed, ledger in his lap. He looked peaceful, as if the long watch was finally over. She didn't cry then. Not until after she'd chopped wood, swept the steps, folded his blankets, and finished the chores he used to do. Then, sitting beside the bed, with the fire rising behind her, she wept the way only the truly orphaned do. Without noise, without end. She buried him behind the barn, beneath the crooked oak where he used to pray. She carved the headstone herself from an old wagon slab, burned his name into it, and beneath it a single line. He made a place. That was all, but it was true. The law sent word months later. There was no official will, no blood kin, nothing to contest. The farm passed to her. Not as a gift, as earned. She kept it running through drought, through hail, through another fever wave that took 6 from Hollow Creek. She kept it open to the women who had nowhere else to go, the girl from the brothel whose eye socket had been broken, the widow with 3 children and no land, the pale girl who never spoke but knew how to sew anything with thread and grit. They didn't come often, but when they did, Lark never asked what they were running from. Only what they needed. Some stayed for a season, some longer. Some left changed, wearing boots and scars, and something inside them they hadn't had when they arrived. A shape, a name, a future. One autumn, a letter arrived with an unfamiliar seal. It came from Longbrush. From the new mayor, the town had changed hands twice since her father died drunk behind the saloon, face down in a ditch. The mayor wanted to host a founders' ceremony, honor the old families, invite descendants. They asked if Lark would speak. She didn't respond. Instead, she rode out at dawn, took the long trail through the ridge, and stood at the edge of Longbrush without entering. The town looked smaller now, like a broken jaw too long unhealed. She saw the spot where the auction block used to be. There was no plaque, no marker, nothing to say what had been sold there. So she knelt, drew her knife, and carved a single word into the base of the ruined post. Remember. Then she turned her back to it and never looked over her shoulder again. When Lark was old, the plum trees bore fruit in abundance. The farm passed into the hands of a girl she'd once fed and taught to shoot. She didn't call her daughter, but she left her everything. The rifle, the ledger, the ring, and a name people no longer whispered, but spoke plain. Lark Vane, the girl who wasn't bought, the woman who wasn't broken, the survivor who made the silence hers and gave it back, shaped like justice.